now that we know a little bit more about delta G, or Gibbs free energy, we need to see how this relates to Q versus K. So if we have an equilibrium reaction that can proceed in both the forward and reverse directions, meaning that A can proceed to B in the forward direction and B can proceed to A in the reverse direction, how will delta G and Q versus K relate? So if we have a situation where Q is less than K, we know from previous videos that Q is always trying to get to a point where it is equal to K to establish equilibrium. So Q will have to increase. So in order for Q to increase, we would need to increase the concentration of our products. To do this, we should run this reaction in the forward direction. Now, what we can say when Q is less than K is that this reaction will proceed spontaneously in the forward direction. Meaning, because Q is less than K, this reaction on its own, without the input of any energy, wants to proceed to the products so that it can establish equilibrium. So when Q is less than K, we can say that delta G will be negative to indicate that this is a spontaneous reaction. In the forward direction, I should add. So again, when Q is less than K, Q needs to become bigger to establish equilibrium. We are going to run this reaction in the forward direction to increase our concentration of products. We will say that delta G will be negative for this reaction in the forward direction, meaning it will proceed spontaneously from A to B. Now, what happens when Q is greater than K? So in this case, Q needs to decrease in order to become equal to K and establish equilibrium. How can we decrease Q? Well, instead of running this reaction in the forward direction, making more products, we should decrease the amount of products we have and increase the concentration of our reactants. So we should run this reaction in the reverse direction. So what we can say is that this reaction will proceed spontaneously in the reverse direction. What we can also say is that it is not spontaneous in the forward direction. So when Q is greater than K, we do not want to run this reaction in the forward direction. It will proceed spontaneously without any input of energy in the reverse direction. In order to run this reaction in the forward direction, non-spontaneously, we would need to input a positive amount of energy. This means delta G is positive. So it is not spontaneous in the forward direction. I should add that when we talk about delta G, we are using the sign to indicate if it is spontaneous or not in the forward direction. So delta G being negative means we are spontaneous in the forward direction. Delta G being positive means we are not spontaneous in the forward direction, but that we are spontaneous in the reverse direction. Lastly, if Q is equal to K, we are already at equilibrium in delta G is equal to 0. So as a summary, when we have an equilibrium reaction, if Q is less than K, we will spontaneously proceed in the forward direction to increase our concentration of products. Delta G will be negative. If Q is greater than K, we will proceed spontaneously in the reverse direction, meaning delta G will be positive. It will not be spontaneous in the forward direction. We would have to put in energy to run that reaction in the forward direction. And if Q is equal to K, we are already at equilibrium and delta G will be equal to 0.